All right, let's dive into one of the most challenging ideas from the theologian John Calvin. It's this. To truly desire the life to come, we first have to learn to hold this present life in contempt. Yeah, it sounds pretty radical, right? So let's really get into what he meant by that, why it was so central to his thinking, and how he believed this tough idea was actually the key to finding true comfort.
So Calvin kicks things off with a question that's just as piercing today as it was 500 years ago. Are we too attached to this world? I mean, really think about it. Your plans, your goals, your day-to-day worries. Calvin would say that our natural state is a kind of brutish love of this world, an instinct that just keeps our eyes glued to what's right in front of us.
He's saying that our minds get stunned and deadened by the empty glitter of all these things. Stuff like riches, power, and ambition. They're not just little distractions in his view. No, they're like spiritual anchors. They weigh our hearts down so heavily that we literally can't look up and think about anything higher, anything eternal.
And this is where Calvin points out this huge contradiction, right? Intellectually, we all know life is short. It's the oldest saying in the book. But our actions, they tell a completely different story. We plan, we build, we save. It's like we're trying to build our own little version of immortality right here on Earth, totally forgetting that it's all just temporary.
So, if we're so naturally stuck in this mindset, how do we ever break free? Well, Calvin's answer is that God doesn't just leave us stuck. He has a way of shaking us awake. And it's often pretty harsh.
And this brings us to a really crucial concept he called the discipline of the cross. The cross here is a symbol for suffering, and for Calvin, this suffering is never random. It has a divine purpose. And that purpose is to teach us, through direct, painful experience, that this life is, vain and fleeting. Every single hardship becomes a lesson, designed to break our obsession with the world and point us toward our real home.
And wow, this really shows you just how systematic Calvin believed this whole process is. It's like our earthly security is being dismantled piece by piece. God allows instability to show us our peace isn't guaranteed. He allows loss to show our riches can vanish. He allows humiliation and disease to remind us again and again that nothing we build or value down here is permanent.
And that all leads to the absolute heart of his argument, right here in his own words. That feeling of contempt for this life, it isn't some unfortunate side effect of suffering. It's the goal of the suffering. It's the prerequisite. He's saying you just can't truly long for the next world until you've seen this one for what it is, troubled, turbulent, and at the end of the day, deeply unsatisfying.
Okay, so this whole idea is built on this really stark contrast that Calvin paints between our current reality and the one that's to come. And to really get why contempt is the goal, you have to understand this fundamental comparison.
Just look at these metaphors he uses. I mean, this life isn't a waiting room. It's an exile. It's not just a physical place. It's a tomb, a prison. To stay here is to be immersed in death, away from God's presence. But the next life, that's our true homeland. That's entry into real life, perfect freedom and being with God. The difference he's painting couldn't possibly be more extreme.
And this question from Calvin just sums it up so perfectly. If you truly believe heaven is your home, then logically, how else can you see your time on earth except as a temporary and often difficult exile?
Okay, I know what you're thinking. This sounds incredibly bleak, right? So am I just supposed to hate my life? But here's where Calvin brings in a really crucial nuance. It's not about being ungrateful. It's about finding this very specific, very difficult balance.
So, on one hand, Calvin is really clear that this life, even with all its misery, is still a gift from God. The very fact that you can breathe, see, or experience anything at all is a sign of God's kindness. And for that, we owe gratitude. It's where we get our first little taste of God's goodness.
But then, and this is the key, you get the other side of the paradox. That gratitude doesn't cancel out the contempt. The most important phrase here is when compared. The value of this life, which is a real value, just shrinks to almost nothing when you put it next to the infinite glory of the next life. So it's a relative contempt, not some absolute hatred of existence.
And this is where his metaphor of the sentry post just ties it all together beautifully. Think about it. A soldier is grateful for their post. They do their duty faithfully, they hold their ground, but they never ever mistake the battlefield for home. They are always waiting for the call to return. And for Calvin, that's exactly how we should live, gratefully, dutifully, but always with our hearts longing to be called home.
Okay, so let's follow this logic. If this life is an exile and heaven is home, what does that do to our view of the one thing that gets us from here to there? I'm talking about death.
The logical endpoint of Calvin's argument is a pretty radical rethinking of fear itself. And Calvin does not mince words here. He says it is monstrous for a believer to tremble at the thought of death. Now, why such strong language? Well, for him, that fear reveals you're still too in love with the prison. It's a failure of faith. It's a sign that you don't really believe in the glory of the homeland you claim you're headed towards.
So he sets up these two completely different ways of looking at death. On the one hand, there's what our gut, our natural senses tell us. It's dissolution, a dreadful end. But then there's what faith sees. And faith sees something totally different. It sees renewal, the recall from exile, the moment where we're not stripped bare, but instead fully clothed in heavenly glory. Faith completely transforms what the event means.
And for Calvin, this is basically the final exam in what he calls the School of Christ, his term for the whole journey of spiritual growth. The true sign of a mature faith isn't just accepting death, it's joyfully awaiting it. That's the ultimate test of whether you've truly learned the lesson that this world is not your home.
But for all its talk of contempt and suffering, this whole worldview isn't actually meant to be a downer. In fact, for Calvin, it's the only place you can find true, lasting comfort in a world full of pain. It's the final triumph of the cross.
Because this is what's on the other side. This is the why behind all of it. It's this incredible promise of being welcomed into a peaceful kingdom where every tear is gone, where you're clothed in glory and you're made a sharer in God's own happiness. This hope is the fuel for everything else he's talking about.
So at the end of the day, the stakes here are just incredibly high. Calvin's basically saying there are only two other ways to get through a difficult life. You either fall into total despair, or you distract yourself with the world's empty pleasures. This third way, looking beyond this life to the next, is what he presents as the sole comfort that can stand up to anything this world throws at you.
And so that leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? In an age that's constantly telling us to find our purpose, our bliss, our best life right now, how does this 500-year-old idea challenge our modern pursuit of happiness? It's definitely a profound thought to end on.